think the first thing you should be thinking out there is like, why are we not just calling this thing Smartabase? Why am I calling it ADAPS? So the truth of the matter is, way before we ever identified Smartabase, we had this idea of being able to ingest and aggregate and analyze data. And in fact, as Josh is in the room, we had thought about doing it ourselves and then looked at a bunch of commercial products and decided that this was the better way to go. So the idea of doing this is historically much older than where we're at today. It's also the case that the Air Force and the DoD just in large, what we are married to, what we are invested in is a capability, right? Not any one particular product. So Smartabase is filling the bill for us, right? And if you look at the other apps ecosystem we're using, strength and conditioning apps, or endurance apps, or physiological monitoring apps, right? It's those capabilities, not the individual products that we're really interested in. And we just need to keep that in mind moving forward. So you guys may not be really familiar with what's happening over at AFRL, so I thought I'd just give a backtrack on what's going on in Strang Lab before I really get into the ADAPS system. So Strang Lab basically is the exercise science laboratory for the Air Force, all of the Air Force. There's a couple little fledgling projects going out there, but we're basically it. And it's a shared laboratory space across the human performance wing, which I work in, where anything that kind of interacts with exercise science or exercise physiology comes in. So I'm the director, I'm the principal investigator, I run the lab, but there's a lot of other investigators that run the lab or that contribute to the lab with their research, like chemists and materials engineers coming in with next prototype sensors, right? And they can test them there before we go out into the field. It's also the case that it's really important for you guys to know the way that I built the team, or that we've built the team over the last couple of years. I built the team to mimic HP teams that are mostly embedded in our special operations units. So if you look across the people that are in my team, I'm an athletic trainer. The lab coordinator is also an athletic trainer who moonlights for the NFL doing their concussion protocols on the weekends. 2 exercise physiologists, 2 strength coaches, 3 strength coaches now, a dietitian. A lot of the people we hired don't just have those degrees. They were pretty elite athletes, so they understand what human performance services are and how the technology could be integrated. So it's really important that we keep that focus, because I want to make sure that we understand the use cases for our customers, which are those embedded human performance teams. If you look at our core research areas where we're heavily invested, these are really the 6. The one that I'm probably most passionate about these days is the performance profiling. And I'll get to this at the end of the talk. But Steve said, we have so much data, we don't know what to do with it. And Steve, actually, where are you at? I know exactly what I want to do with it. It just took that long for us to generate enough data that we could start mining it in the intelligent ways that we have been wanting to. And I'll get to that a little bit at the end. But that comes with this idea of performance profiling. I'm really interested in cognitive training because I have a background in cognitive psychology. I can tell you, if you were at the HP Summit in Colorado, my colleague and I, Aaron Barbase, basically sat up there and say, cognitive training isn't working very well, but we're working on some methods to sort of circumvent that in the future using high-fidelity military simulators, where we think we can embed the psychometric properties that you would find in a really nice neurocognitive battery in something that's actually contextual. We do tons of sensor monitoring, whether it's bringing in sensors that are currently on the market and testing them and maybe trying to validate them, or playing with next generation sensors you guys haven't even quite seen yet, and then determining if the Air Force should make an investment in those sensors. We're even starting to mess around in the last 6 to 8 months with some implantables, but I won't go into too much detail about that right now. Nutraceuticals is a big deal for us. Again, I'm not just interested in enhancing physical performance or muscle growth, but I'm really heavily interested in enhancing cognition. So we just finished up a randomized clinical trial with a prototype supplement developed with the University of Illinois and Abbott, showing that we can kind of increase decision-making time and reaction time with common ingredients that you're finding now in a lot of these things, like omega-3s and luteins and stuff like that. Performance software, of course, is a big deal for us. Because that's the front end of how we want to our subjects in the laboratory and our operators are going to be interacting with this software, so it has to work really well. There's a human factors component to that we pay a lot of attention to. And of course, we're heavily invested in recovery technologies. I'm actually running a study right now looking at the efficacy of a float tank, but then we'll move on to other types of technologies, whether it's photobiomodulation, or if you're thinking about transcranial magnetic stimulation in that kind of context as well. At the base, Strong Lab, what I call Strong Lab proper. This is how we've actually set up the laboratory to do all of this work. At the center of it are 50 or 60 airmen, active duty, who voluntarily come into the lab to train with me for as long as they're stationed at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. In fact, we just tried to do this with a person who is deployed, and it worked really well, but she's super compliant. We're not sure we can scale that. And what they do is they undergo supervised, personalized training for up to 2 years, and we do 24/7 monitoring on them. And so here's our monitoring battery. You can see the daily monitoring battery that's going on, and then you can see the extensive things that we do with them every quarter. One of the cool things that we're actually starting to do with the strength and conditioning apps and a couple others is actually embed test sets into their training, and they don't even notice that those are the ones we're actually tracking. And so we're actually going to be able to reduce the size of this quarterly testing protocol over time. But the goals of setting this up was to do personalized performance prediction modeling, especially influenced with the artificial intelligence here moving into the near future. I want to be able to do rapid, small-n clinical trials. So when my sponsors, who are the Air Force but also Special Operations Command, say, I want to know about this technology, I don't have to go through a new IRB and go recruit people right at a brand new protocol. We just onboard right into the 50 or 60 airmen who are training with us already and who we know so much about. And we onboard for related projects. So for instance, a colleague of mine is really interested in basic biomarker discovery in biofluids such as saliva respiration and sweat. Well, when she comes in to collect her data, and we set up the centrifuge like right there in the laboratory, and they're wearing these Tegaderm patches, and we're using syringes to pull out the sweat and stuff like that. When she goes back to her lab to dissect that data, it came with all that extra information I was already tracking on those airmen who were training with us. So I know how they slept that day. I know how stressed they were that day. I know what they ate that day, right? And that becomes really important for her when she's trying to covary all the factors that are going on. So it's been a really cool resource that a lot of people are interested in. And in the next couple years, what you're gonna see is us really getting into omics, transcriptomics, proteomics, genetics, epigenetics. It's all coming as a part of this kind of big project. So now I'm gonna segue into ADAPS. What is it? If you heard my talk a couple years ago at the MIT Sports Analytics Conference, this slide is just barely updated. We're just trying to ingest and aggregate data from all these human performance technologies, apply our custom analytics and algorithms, and create real-time visualizations that have actionable information. Why do we need to develop it? Well, I've thought for a long time, we actually have a responsibility to our airmen to have good dossiers on what's been happening to them. If you actually look through the way that medical records and stuff are doing in the DoD currently, especially with our special operators, once they get out, because they don't report a lot of things, or maybe it kind of gets lost, it doesn't quite get recorded the way that it is because our EMRs are really clunky, they go, man, I have all these problems, but I don't have any documentation on how to get them fixed. And then that becomes a problem when they enter into their veteran status. So I think we owe it to them. The second thing I'm really trying to do is improve the service support for performance optimization. I really am not trying to force our HP teams into documenting more. I want them to work more efficiently, I want them to communicate better, and I want to make them the decision-making better. So if our data management platform, ADAPS and Smartabase, isn't doing that, then we're not doing our job. And that kind of bleeds into this idea of reducing workload and improving decision-making. How does it work? We have this cloud-based data management and analysis system, Smartabase, and then underneath that is this ecosystem of user apps, where we have our strength and conditioning apps, our nutrition apps, our surveys, maybe some of our mindfulness techniques, as well as wearables for passive and objective monitoring. And they're all integrated with APIs. So that's one of the big things that Fusion, we've been really pushing with Fusion over the last couple years, is increasing the number of API integrations. And let me give you an example of that. So a lot of the companies who produce these S&C apps are in the room today. Well, we have been really pushing towards making sure the API's integration with all of them, because I want to give units options to scale, based on price, based on need, based on however they want to program. Because on the back end, sets times reps times weight, that's all the same to me. And it's going to be the same to the bean counters at the top. So as long as that's the case, I can kind of have flexibility, but with standardization. All right, so now what I'm going to do is actually take you through a live system demo. And some of this is, what we did at AFRL was set up a demo site because I can never show anybody's live data of any of the units we're working with or the research subjects. So we set up this data full of fake users and fake data that actually these days doesn't look like any of the user sites. The unit sites look a lot different than this, but they contain the same types of information. All right, so you can imagine you're signing in as a commander or an HP lead, and the first thing you would see are all the current open incidents that are going on in your unit. A little breakdown of them. Then you can scroll down right on your front page and you have something called the stickman status. That's basically the unit's operational status, okay? And we use the player card dash, right? Still not a dashboard builder, but a whole historical player card dash that Smartabase has had around for a couple years. And right away, you can see from the top like where everybody's at for the past 25 days. If we have 4 operators in the red, that basically means they're not ready to go. Yellow, we're not really sure. You can make a decision. And green are fully operational. The cool thing about the way that we set up this dashboard is if you flip these cards on the back, you give the commander just the information that they wanted. They're limited like a tweet. You can only put in so many characters. So here's the plan of action to get this guy back into the fight. Here's the issue. Here's the last thing that was updated. And we're not telling a commander or an HP lead what to do. Like they might still make a decision to send somebody to go do something. I never know whether they do or don't. But at least able to have this information on the tip of their fingertips whenever they want it now. They don't have to go down the hall and ask about it. They don't have to go call up the doctor or whatever, so that's a really nice feature. If you look at some of the other couple dashboards that we've built, here's a good one. We're actually able to tabulate all of the encounters that are going on inside a unit at any one time, or should say over a period of time. And this is a way for us to really start looking at usage from the HP teams. And how it's happening, it's either a practitioner who's logging it in to say, hey, I saw Johnny, and he came in to get an ice bag, and he was there for 20 minutes or something like that. Or some of the new ways we're doing it is actually setting up kiosks that are at the front of all of these organizations, like the athletic training room, or we have a kiosk set up at one location in front of the social worker's office. And they just say, the operators just generically say, hey, why they're here. And the cool thing about that is we can actually look at, essentially, usage for these support resources. So if you look over a given period of time, you can see the number of encounters, who are for the ortho, who are from the strength coach, who are from the chaplain. And the cool thing about that on the military side is that I can actually link all of those encounters to a TRICARE charge. I know how much the military would have paid out for that at some other facility. And so I can look at a total service value. We can go in and break these things down by who's using the resources. So is it the operator, command, support staff, or other? The others are oftentimes like the social worker working with like a spouse or children or something like that. We can break it down by body area, by the purpose, why they're there for rehab. That's kind of one of the really cool things that we're able to track versus the medical community. The medical community is always there to treat a problem. These HP teams are not just doing that. They're there for maintenance, or not just rehabilitation, but prevention, right? And that's a service that you just would not get at the hospital otherwise, and we can start to now capture that. So one of the things I wanted to really emphasize today, though, this is all because if you guys have seen me talk over the last couple of years, that's all kind of old hat. But there are two new things. There's one new thing that we're doing, but I'm going to show you 2 instantiations of it. Up to this point, all of the dashboards, all of the information is basically being collected by these human performance teams and fed back to their leads and commanders. The operators really haven't been involved. We might take data from them passively from their wearables or from their ecosystem of apps, but we haven't really fed information back to them. We've been sort of scared to do so as well because we're really concerned about compliance. So in the laboratory, what we started doing was setting up these dashboards around what was the critical performance information we've been bringing in, and how do we want to, let's see if this works, how do we want to display this information back to people? And this was actually motivated by me seeing what Josh was doing with some of the other groups this past Christmas, and I said, we really need to want to come up with a way to do this. But you can already see from this dashboard how many different sources we were pulling data from, right? So we're pulling it from all these different sources and aggregating it for them. And this is not live with any operational unit, but it is live in the research lab right now. So the cool thing you can see right off the bat is compliance. So we say, hey, look, listen, right on your performance dash, when was the last time you sank all your devices that we're asking you to wear right now or interact with? And then we do things like we can track your strength progressions. So we're doing calculations to estimate 1 rep max for bench press, for a trap bar deadlift, front squat, pull-ups. We get in here, down here, and you actually see the Air Force fitness test. So the cool thing about that is we can estimate the number of push-ups you can do in a minute and sit-ups you can do in a minute, which is for our airmen. I know that the test seems kind of antiquated and old, but it's actually really important to them because it's tied to things like their retention, and they actually get like extra days off and stuff if they start scoring in certain criteria. And they can see it right here, which is really nice. But the cool thing is if you just scroll up to the top, you can tab over. We're going to go across different dimensions. We can look at nutrition. So here you see your weekly nutrition goal. And the why and how you're going to do that based on a consult with your dietitian. We're tracking your body composition, abdominal circumference, body fat, which is a part of the Air Force fitness test. And then we actually have your target goal calories versus your actual calories that you're logging. So we're giving that information right back to them. Same thing when we tab over with things that we're confident in at the moment in physiology, which is really based around resting heart rate and heart rate variability trends right now. And we actually give them a little index so they can understand what the heck all that information means, where it's intuitive to us, but maybe not to our subjects. And load. And the cool thing that we've been doing with load recently is not just looking at load that's happening inside the Strang lab with the prescribed exercise regimens we're giving them. They actually take a survey to say, like, did you mow the grass? Did you kind of do these extra things? And we can do a cumulative load score. And we're able to feed that back to them. I'll show you another example of this that I think will be really kind of impactful for some of the DoD folks in here. But you guys will, even the sports folks will understand this as well. There's this form that was created called the Tactical Performance Index by one of our special operations units. They were working with the University of Oklahoma to do this. And the basic idea behind it was we want to look at these specific performance dimensions, things like sleep, social interactions. It went beyond just what we would traditionally think of, like what we think of human performance. In special operations, these things consider like mental and spiritual health as well. So they take a short survey, and what they've done is they've accumulated enough data, they can look at the quartile ranges and essentially implement cut scores, threshold scores, or meeting certain thresholds. And depending on how a guy fills it out, he is supposed to get feedback about what human performance resource he should go access. So, hey, you scored this on your social interactions. Maybe you should go see the mental performance coach or the social worker, like right there, immediate feedback. Up to this point, they've been doing this in PDF live forms and then calculating the scores and stuff in Excel, and then trying to email it back to the HP teams as well as the operators. So they gave this to us about a month or so ago, and Kristen's over here who did all the programming and dashboard building for us. I didn't try to make the dashboards pretty. I tried to mimic exactly the way that they were doing it currently, and then I was going to blow their minds later about some of the awesome stuff we could do with it. So you imagine you take out this survey. It's about a 25-point survey, and then what you can do is just scroll down, and you'll see your sleep score versus everybody else. Those are normative. And then it'll say, hey, maybe you should go see our sleep therapist or whatever for Thor 3. Same thing with the pain score, although we've got this out by 5 or 6 different dimensions. But again, the key point is not like the specifics maybe of the index per se, although it's going to be available to everybody that all of our operational units probably within the next couple weeks, is that we're closing the loop, right? We're closing the loop and providing actionable feedback to our operators. All right, I'm going to jump back into my slide deck here. Sweet. And so that was really just what I'm trying to articulate here with this slide. The next thing I want to talk about is the organizational structure that's drastically changed what we've done with ADAPTs within this past year. So up to this point, let's say up to about 6 months ago, all the units we were working with, the lab, any of the studies we were running, it was all on one Smartabase site. And it was really, really messy. And we had too many builders. So I probably have how many builders do you think you have? 10, 12? 10, 12 builders? And some of the units we were working with were getting a little uncomfortable with the number of people who might have access to their data. So you guys have been hearing about this a little bit, but we're the ones who are probably doing it the most. We set up this parent-child relationship that's going on in Smartabase right now. And this is really how it works. So AFRL is sort of sitting at the top. On this side, we have, here I'm just showing you the major operational units that we're working with. So here's a 24 Special Operations Wing, Guardian Angel, ACC Rescue Squadrons, that's Pararescue Jumpers and Combat Rescue Officers. 93rd AGAL has a lot of TACPs, so they're actually embedded in a lot of Army units, but they're an ACC component. 25th ASOS, they're out in Hawaii, they're a support unit. And 56 TRS is our first fighter pilot unit, who's trying to grow out. The cool thing about these is when any of the units in the 2-4 SAO, they actually sign into their own URL. They never even see the AFRL is there. All the dashboards and stuff are completely customized to them. In fact, I don't even have access to the 24 SAO anymore. I cut myself out because because in the military, like, regardless of my security clearance, I don't have a need to know that information. What I need to know is what the forms are going in there and what the dashes are sort of being built out. But my builders, who are trusted agents of the units, are the only people who really need to be in there interacting with the information. And Smartabase is allowing us to do that by using this parent-child relationship. And that's true for all the other organizations. Within the next year, Marcus mentioned that SOCOM, or Smartabase is sort of like becoming SOCOM POTUS program of record. All these units will migrate off of my site. Like, they won't be a part of AFRL's site anymore. We will have transitioned them to fully operational and sustainable. Hopefully. Maybe not all of them, but we're going to do our best. But on the other side, the research side is going to live on. How it currently sits is Strong Lab has its own because we're collecting so much data. 711th Human Performance Wing is going to have its own, in which case there's a ton of other researchers, and you'll see this when Panana gets up to talk a little bit later. We're getting a lot of traction in the research community. Everybody wants to do cloud-based computing, and they didn't know how to do it before. We leaned forward and started using it for all of our research projects, and now everybody else wants to too. So I get a lot of researchers coming and say, hey, I want to do this. Can you set me up with a site? So we kind of did that. We've got a little kind of fledgling research project going on with USAFA Athletics, and they've got a human performance lab that's a little bit more service-oriented. And then the really interesting thing that we were able to do is we set up this sandbox. So I'm really interested in having lots of builders, right, if I want to do all these research projects, but I can't have them on my main site where they can screw things up. And anybody who knows who's been programming or building inside Smartabase is like, it can happen, especially when you have really immature builders who have access. So people were, especially I think about Tom back there, he's like paranoid about the number of builders we have around. So we set up this sandbox so that people could go in and play and try new things out, but they wouldn't screw things up. I didn't include this slide, but it's actually a really critical slide, because I want to convey this information. Back in April, we convened what is called a requirements working group around the ADAPT system. I'm the moderator, but I'm not a voter. But voting members are coming from a lot of these organizations. Essentially what they did was they agreed on, and it was like a hellish 2 days of battling back and forth. I was very stressed. What the minimum data capture requirements were going to be for all of Air Force Special Warfare. That's a lot of people. And the minimum requirement there's no wearables in it. There's barely any third-party apps. It's a lot of surveys. It's a lot of really basic information. But it's a milestone in an achievement that we are going to have standardization across the entire enterprise. That's awesome. Now, if a unit has a proclivity for a specific app or a specific wearable or a specific dashboard or whatever, fine. We'll build it out for them, no big deal. That's the really key part of what Smartabase is sort of starting to offer for us in this ADAPT system, which is to have your cake and eat it too. On the back end, the beam counters are going to see all the same standardized information. But up front, it can be within the workflow of that individual unit and their resources, because they're not all resourced the same and they don't have the same missions. So we're kind of really proud about that. We're actually going to be reconvening in about 10 days, which I'm nervous about again, to go back and reevaluate those requirements, as well as to look at where we're at with our rollout to all the units and see if we're on schedule, which we're not as close as I'd like to be. The last thing I want to talk to you about organizationally is cloud migration. So currently, all our data is actually housed on a server that Fusion doesn't have direct access to, like it's on a contract server. Within the next, really soon, couple months, we're going to be up on the Amazon GovCloud at the IL5 level, which is PII and PHI. That's like all your private personal information and health records. And I just wanted to show you guys like why we're doing it. The reason why we're doing it is we need an authorization to operate for the Air Force Research Lab, for the research side, but the operational side. And once we complete that, it'll be a template for other USAF commands as well as other DoD components. So NHRC could like take our authorization to operate, mimic that, maybe alter it just a little bit per their procedures or whatever, and then they can get up and running too. And then when is that going to happen? So we're going to have this conditional authorization by the 1st of January and a full authorization, I think, by the 1st of June next year. And these green dots just tell us like where we're actually at in the cloud migration process. So that becomes really important for us because once we move to that level of security, we're going to be able to do more things that we've been sort of hesitant to do up to this point. So we're really kind of looking forward to that. But I just wanted to prep everybody that's happening or why it's happening. If you were also the 40% of DoD folks in here, that might be really useful information, and I'm willing to talk with you more about it afterwards. What I wanted to sort of leave the talk with then is what we've been doing with a lot of the data that we've been gathering in Smartabase. So I'm going to show you 3 studies that are kind of quick hit findings for some of the research that we've been working on. So all the data was somehow collected and housed in Smartabase. There's a sort of new saliva sensor coming out. It's available now. I think it'll be available in more mass production sometime around the Christmas, called the MX3. It looks at saliva osmolarity. Saliva osmolarity in some certain circumstances can be a really nice indication of hydration status. Saliva osmometers work on, laboratory grade ones, work on freezing point, and they're like $10,000 machines, really expensive. MX3 basically said, okay, we can come up with a sensor system and some app feedback, and they took that really expensive lab osmometer and put it into a point-of-care device. And what I wanted to do was validate it, just for its accuracy. So we did. And if you look, we were taking passive drool samples out of the Strang lab, so you come off your workout or before your workout, and you're stuck there with this tube, like spitting into it, but not trying to get bubbles and stuff. That was quite an annoying procedure. If we actually measure the OSMET3, the lab osmometer we were looking at versus the MX3, you can see the correlational value. Like, that's pretty good. That doesn't happen in my world a bit, like where I do a lot of behavioral science work or whatever, ever. And then what we did was we took the OSMET3 and we looked at MX3, so OSMET3 from the passive drool tube versus MX3, we just took a sample. You're supposed to take it right out of your mouth, like within a couple seconds, so it's not the exact same sample, and the correlation was still 0.77. That's really good. All that data, when we took it, was there a threat of contamination in the sample? Like, did you wash your mouth out with water, or did you take a drink of soda or something right before? We collected all that data so quickly in Smartabase. We hit a report, sent it out to the statisticians, and we were like done with this within 2 weeks. It was awesome. Sampled 200 people, had the analysis done 2 weeks' time. That would have taken me 6 months to run a study on under any other circumstance. We've been doing the same sort of thing when we're looking at anaerobic power assessments. So in my laboratory, I'm old school, so I'm a huge fan of the wind gate, right? Lower body wind gate. We even do upper body wind gate, and everybody's like groaning if you're in an operational unit or a team or an athletic team or something like that, because nobody wants one of those big white bikes around. But what we do is started looking at other ways to test it. So we were looking at basically a lower body dynamometer, which is really expensive. It's like a mid-thigh pool, essentially, for those people out there. That's a pretty popular one, and we were looking at broad jumps. And basically what we were able to do is say, and versus the GymAware, which is just a tensiometer. So if you think about like cost, like no cost, a little cost, really expensive, something in the middle, right? But also has applications for training. And you can look at the correlations here between like lower wind gate, peak power, and the force power that was coming off of the gym wear, just from doing, and I forgot to mention, we're just doing 3 counter movement jumps, right, with a dowel rod. Right? That's pretty good, 0.93 of correlations. Or if you look over the average power, and you look at the power outputs that are coming off of the gym wear, that's really good. So you can imagine, this is on a sample of just about like 100 or so. We're probably up to closer to 300 or 400 different jumps now, so these stats are gonna get tighter over the next couple weeks. Again, all the data being pulled in using the Adapt Smartabase system, cleaving it off and analyzing it real quickly. But the nice output of this is I can just say, hey, listen, I know you guys don't have Wingate sitting around everywhere, but a lot of you guys have tensiometers these days, and we can give you a really short protocol to do anaerobic power pretty quickly and cheaply that's of equivalence. The last one I'm going to leave you with is, and I think the most important one, daily wellness questionnaires. We all have them. They're like the base of sports science, right? You don't have this, you have nothing. So there haven't been really great validation studies on any of these, like 1 or 2. Or people are just thinking it up off the top of their head of things that make sense. So we've been going back to say, man, we really need to validate. This is core to what we do. So we're actually in our 4th iteration now of the Daily Wellness Survey, because we keep every 3 months or so, we go back, we do factor analysis on it, see what we do, and then we see how it's going, and then we go back and tweak it again to see if we can make the factors that we're working on a little bit more solid. And what I mean by that is the basic questionnaire, and you guys know this, like we're gonna ask about recovery, fatigue, soreness, sleep, motivation, stress. Maybe we ask about hydration, energy levels, right? And we're doing it on these different point scales. Is it a 5-point scale? Is it a 7-point scale? Is it a smiley face? These are the things that people are using, right? So we went back and we said, okay, we have this one factor in our analysis that's like driving everything. And it's this one about recovery, fatigue, and soreness. They're so highly correlated with one another. It's dominating the factor structure. And it's basically asking the question of, do you feel icky or not today, right? And it's actually a really nice predictor of performance too, but there's some future research that I can show you about that. There's the second factor looming out there that is not as strong around motivation and stress. They're orthogonally related, but they're really, or negatively correlated with one another, but related. We've been working really hard in the last couple months to try to shore up that factor. We're not sure if it's related to like transient motivation and stress, like what's your stress level or motivation to be here right today, or whether that motivation in particular is related to like, are you referencing what your long-term performance goal is? Like, I'm not motivated to reach my goal. I'm not on my path today. So we've been asking more questions actually on the survey, which is ballooned out to 12 right now for a limited period of time, to try to see if we can shore that one up. And sleep seems to be off on its own. So more to come on that, but the important part of this is we actually take this information and we send it out to not just our clients, but the vendors that we're working with, especially our S&C vendors, and say, hey, look, this is what we've been doing with our wellness scale that's native to your app. Maybe you think you should update it because we've been doing the science on it. The last thing that was really been interesting, and we've replicated this now 3 times, is that this represents the variance that's going on and the composite wellness score over a period of time. And what we're showing here is it really doesn't stabilize. The people's responses don't stabilize until about 3 weeks in, 3 weeks of survey usage. So if you think about big scale surveys where people take it once, how do survey researchers get over this? They get over this by increasing their sample size. And they just say, oh, this guy was only using the scale, even though it was a 1 to 10 point scale, he's only using 3 to 7. But that all washes out in the error if you have enough samples. But what happens if you're sampling an individual person or a very small number of people and they have weird scale usages? Basically what we're saying is the scale usage, the way they're responding doesn't really settle until about 21 days into using it. And what does that mean? It means that if you started using a daily wellness survey, don't jump the gun in the first couple weeks with the data that you're seeing from your athletes or your operators. They're still getting used to, they're still acclimating to the scale usage for themselves, right? So don't fly off the handle. What's next? All right, this is the last slide. What's next are really 3 major things. The first we already mentioned, which is this migration of the operational units to a sustainment model where SOCOM, right? So that's going to be sort of the program of record moving forward. Air Combat Command is now getting a lot of the same human performance resources that our special operators got. So right now they're going to aviators because everybody wants it. Right? It's awesome. Well, as their organizations are becoming more mature, That's what they need to do first, make sure they get the right hires, the right people in place, right? For the right tests. So people are like, should we do a counter movement jump with pilots? Maybe we should do some isometric strength, like when you're pulling G's or whatever, like how many hamstring pulls are we getting from our pilot communities? Probably not that many, right? But they've seen it from the other side of the house, and they're like, wow, we want to use those tools too. So there's a lot of, we're doing a lot of consultation to help those organizations get up and running. But once they become mature, then they're gonna want a tool like ADAPS, right, to make their jobs easier and communicate things faster. So there's gonna be plenty of more work for us as the idea of HP teams grows out into these other communities. That's also my kind of shot across the bow to say, hey, there's gonna be a lot of jobs out there too. The last thing that we're doing, and I think has been the weakest part of ADAPS up to this point, is actually the analytics, right? We're really good at ingesting data. We can do some basic analytics on it. We're pretty good at visualizing, but we're not doing like advanced, sophisticated statistics. So I'm now in a partnership with DARPA, who has a bunch of different performers. And what we're gonna be doing is taking strong lab data, not operational data, just from the lab, and we're gonna be sending it out to these folks to try to do machine learning and artificial intelligence for something they call counterfactual forecasting. And what that means is, in layman's terms, person A did actions B and C and got outcome D. But if person A had done X and Y, then they have a probability of getting outcome Z, which was better than they had got before. So that doesn't say that we're gonna be automatically prescribing things. There's no robot in the sky that's gonna be saying, hey, do this. But we are gonna say, hey, listen, had you slept better, you would have had an X probability of having this performance enhancement thing. So maybe you should think about sleeping better, right? Or maybe we can tweak the interventions in this way. This won't be ready next year, but in a few years it may. And if it works on our Strang lab data, what we're doing in the lab translates enough to what's happening operationally that we may be able to do the same thing. So I'm really excited about that project.